So we finally have a new trade deal, the USMCA. As Trump calls it, it's a fantastic name. It's the greatest name ever. Oh, no one liked NAFTA. NAFTA was a terrible name, but the USMCA, just a perfect name. Who thinks the USMCA is a great name? Now, I'm not going to do a whole video about the name of the trade deal, but I, I just think it's worth mentioning. Now, let's get to the actual what's actually in this trade deal. So, if you were to read some journalists out there, they would say, well, this is Trump's just re-signing NAFTA. So here's one example. Trump re-signs NAFTA, ending fake crisis he created. Oh, well, you know what? I'm glad to hear that. I guess this video's over. I have nothing to talk about. NAFTA is this new NAFTA, the USMCA, is the exact same trade deal as the old NAFTA. This kind of journalism, this reductive journalism, where you prioritize the punchline over the facts, is disturbing. This is somebody who has a following. I don't really know who this person is, but they have a lot of followers. So this person has influence. And there are people out there that follow him that take what he says as fact and now think, oh, Trump just re-signed NAFTA, pretending he's doing something. Look, that can be the case in other instances. That is not the case here. There are serious changes to NAFTA. So let me first go over some of the good news. So at least from a Canadian perspective here, there's good news for cross-border shoppers. So generally there is a lot of there's customs fees on anything over $20 that you buy from the US, as well as taxes. So there's now new limits for Canada that will be $150 for customs fees. So you have to actually spend $150 to be charged customs fees, and also $40 for taxes. So in terms of cross-border shoppers, that's a good thing. And I know I've ran into this issue when I've tried to buy, say, a t-shirt from a company in the US, and the shipping costs and the customs fees are going to be more than the actual t-shirt itself, which is just insane. So hopefully this will alleviate some issues for those cross-border shoppers. Another benefit here is Chapter 11 is being phased out. Chapter 11 is what allowed corporations to sue the Canadian government over any of our laws that may have restricted their ability to make profits. So that is now being completely phased out. I have to be honest, I'm not sure why the Trump administration was okay with phasing that out. But regardless, that appears to be a good move. But now, what I actually want to focus on here, and this is, I'm mentioning just a few of many changes, but what I want to focus on here is the Canada's serious loss on intellectual property, more specifically as it relates to drugs. So right now in Canada, part of the reason we have cheaper cost of pharmaceuticals is because we have generic versions of drugs before the US has them. So if you remember, there was a story about Bernie Sanders going up to Canada a few years ago to get cheaper drugs for people in Vermont. That was a whole news story. And it's because, part of the reason is because in Canada, you can have generic drugs sooner than Americans can. Now, that appears to be changing. So let me read this breakdown on biological drugs. So first, just to understand what biological drugs is, this is a piece from Michael Geist, the law professor and Canada research chair at the University of Ottawa. Here's his breakdown. Biological drugs are pharmaceuticals involving complex molecules or mixtures of molecules that are made of biological sources manufactured within a living system. They differ from conventional drugs that are manufactured by combining chemical ingredients. Building on greater knowledge of genetics and cell processes, the area represents a major growth area for the pharmaceutical industry. With the complexity comes cost, however, with biological drugs far more expensive than conventional ones. Much like the generic pharmaceutical industry creates cheaper generic versions of chemical drugs, companies have begun to create biosimilars as cheaper versions of biological drugs, relying on data from clinical trials to formulate the alternative. Pharmaceutical companies have therefore sought protections for the clinical data. So, biological drugs is one category under pharmaceuticals, but this is a category that is emerging, and it's now going to be affected by the new laws around patents. So here is what's in the new NAFTA, the USMCA. On the patent side, the big change is the extension of data protection for biological drugs to 10 years. This is a significant increase on the TPP, which offered 8 years or 5 years plus other measures to provide a comparable outcome in the market. This was one of the most contentious TPP issues, as countries recognize that every additional year potentially adds billions of healthcare costs. In fact, even U.S. agencies have expressed doubt about the need for long-term protections. Coming on the heels of the Canada-EU trade deal, which effectively extended patent terms, the additional costs for pharmaceuticals in Canada in the long term will be enormous. And Geist follows that up in a tweet saying, the TPP, CETA, and USMCA ultimately mortgaging healthcare costs for the sake of a deal, extending biologics protections coming on the heels of patent term restoration and other deals will increase costs for pharmaceuticals in Canada. So, big picture here. The cost of your pharmaceuticals are going to go up because of this concession in this trade deal. And this isn't just an issue that is relegated to the Trudeau government. Now, clearly this is a concession that they made here, and they should be criticized on that, but also recognize that this is a bigger issue overall. So under the TPP and CETA, these same sorts of concessions were also made. It's always funny to me when these discussions are going on around a deal like a trade deal, that the protections for the average Canadian are always up for negotiation. They're always willing to give in on those issues, but they'll be more protective over the issues that protect corporations. So understand that this sort of neoliberal policy, this is not just the Liberal Party or not just the Conservative Party. This is an entire way of thinking where you protect corporations, massive corporations, over the benefits of the average person. That is a neoliberal way of thinking. And we continue seeing this push through to the detriment of the average person. So this patent, this concession here, protects drug makers for 10 years, meaning that there are no generic drugs of that same drug for 10 years, meaning whoever creates that drug can control the cost. And as I'm going to show you here, that directly impacts real people. So let me get to some online reaction. First, this is from public health advocate at Queen's University, Aaron Bailey, and he tweets out this. As if the inevitable watered-down liberal version of universal pharmacare wasn't off-putting enough, this is a self-sabotaging concession to the pharmaceutical industry. Without cheap generic biologics, the liberals stand to rationalize an industry-directed model of coverage. And this from a concerned citizen trapped in a whirlpool tweets out, biologics are a growing class of drugs used to treat a host of chronic conditions, but they are very expensive. For me, one dose a month costs $1,800. Granting a 10-year extension to the patents will cost provinces and employers a ton. And this reaction from citizen.org. Potentially lethal. New NAFTA IP chapter requires 10-year biologics monopolies. Worst such rule in a US FTA. And in part they say, the rules go significantly beyond the original NAFTA text in their government-sponsored patent and exclusivity protections for corporate monopoly control over needed medicines. Their purpose is to better insulate expensive new medicines from generic competition, helping pharmaceutical corporations keep the prices of at least some new medicines higher for longer. Canada and Mexico should be embarrassed, perhaps even ashamed, for agreeing to such terms, at least as regards to their own people's access to medicines and health. Mexico and Canada have failed to stand up to North America's neighborhood bully. So, yeah, this is not good. This is, again, a continuation of a neoliberal way of thinking, of protecting corporations over the best interests of the average Canadian. And also, this, in my mind, may impede the ability for this government or a future government to move towards a universal pharmacare system. People can now say, or even the media can now say, oh, it's going to be too expensive now to move to universal pharmacare. So this is bad on all fronts. Though, there is the potential of the other side of that, where if pharmaceuticals do become too expensive for the average Canadian, then there's going to be this groundswell of people that are going to be pushing for a universal pharmacare system. So potentially it could work both ways. But ultimately, in the short term, this is not good for the average Canadian. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button below and consider becoming a patron at therationalnational.com/join. You get some extra content, but also, most importantly, you help support me in continuing to produce these sorts of videos.